You have reached the deepest depths of the internet. If it is greatness you seek, you've come to the wrong show. If it's about not wasting time, don't worry, you're never going to get your time back. If it's knowledge you seek, just be aware, any knowledge gained here is going to be minuscule. So now it's time for Accost with Tony Gerdeman on the Ozone Radio Network.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Accost the Field. I am Tony Gerdeman here, as always, with Tom Orr and our producer, Shannon Sommers. Wanted to take a quick second. Thank you all for joining us. Say hello to the new listeners. Say hello to the old listeners. I'll even say hello to the in-betweeners because you're also listening. So thank you all for tuning in. Numbers are growing each week, so thank you for, I know so many of you are telling your family and waking your children up at night when you hear me or Tom rip on Shannon, and you love that so much. So maybe we'll have some good stuff for you tonight. And speaking of Shannon and Tom, Shannon, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing great, and I just want to thank, I was trying to pull it up here real quick, but you caught me, or that review that we left on iTunes.
The one-star review?
Yes.
Yeah. Thanks for that.
I think that person just misunderstood, because there really is only one star of the show, and it's Shannon.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's true. I think really if you're rating one person as like one star, that's like a complete star. Like you can't get above, like you're one
it's my star,
complete,
and I'm going with
perfect star.
Didn't get any stars. I got one star. I'm running with it.
Yeah, that's.
They don't give you like 5 stars on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. That's not how it works.
Get one star, and that's all you need, and that says it all. And Tom, how are you doing?
I'm great. I'm just glad to be here.
Well, I wanted to. Today, I tweeted that, like, why can't we have pizza peace? Basically, like, why do people have to be so judgmental? Why can't we? Be friendly and not judge pizza, and judge people based on the pizza they eat. And then, Tom, what did you chime in with?
I don't remember. I never remember what I tweet. It's just
basically
it flies out of my brain onto my keyboard, and then it's just gone, and it's just on its way to Mars.
Yeah, basically,
I'm sure it was very nice, whatever it was, very friendly.
Yeah, no, it was basically like, this is just somebody tweeting who has trash pizza opinions. And
oh, well then, yeah, I stand by that.
I mean, does it make you feel like a big man to bully somebody about pizza? and when I say people, I mean me.
When you have people out there that put banana on a pizza, I mean, come on, seriously. How can we live in a world like this?
Well, that's over in Scandinavia, so it's not even real people. But not that I'm judging anybody for what they put on pizza, because I'm not like that. I'm not scum of the earth like that. Like, I think John Lennon said it best when he said, imagine there's no pizza. It isn't hard to do, nothing to kill or die for, really makes you think. But it's probably not worth it because pizza is the best. So with all that being said, let's start the show. Last week. Sorry, Shannon, what?
I was saying sounds good to start the show.
Yeah, let's get it started and see how this goes. Last week, we talked to the linebackers and the cornerbacks. Finally got to talk to Bill Davis since, sometime last year. Talked to Taylor Johnson for the second time this year since he took the job. And I wanted to start off by talking about Tough Borland because we've talked about him pretty much every week. But we've talked about, is he the starter when he comes back, or even before he was injured, we talked about, is he going to be the starter at middle linebacker? Because, like, for me, his numbers really never jumped out at me. He had the Army game was special, but he had like really one or two keys in that game, and he just smashed the fullback or he smashed the tailback. So I was never quite sure if he was the man And that's, Urban Meyer, told me 2-3 weeks ago that, yeah, he was one of the guys that was locked in. And so then, one of the things that Bill Davis said when we talked to him is Tough runs the show. Everybody in there looks at Tough, and they know Tough knows, and Tough gets you set, and Tough does his job every down. So I wrote a piece this week, and I was looking at, looking at drive charts and just regular stuff like that. And I know it's not the end all be all, but in the games against Power 5 opponents where Tough Borland started, the Buckeye defense gave up 8 points per game. In the games against Power 5 teams where he didn't start, the Buckeye defense gave up 32.8 points per game. And a lot of stuff, different things go into that. Tough Borland isn't necessarily out there. He isn't out there on nickel downs. And so, he's only out there for a portion of the time. But I think that the biggest stat for me in all of that is last year in the games that he started, the 9 games he started, the Buckeye defense only gave up 1 touchdown drive when he was in there. And that came against Michigan in the second quarter for Michigan's first drive. And I say 1 touchdown drive, meaning he gave up more, but it was the only touchdown drive that began with like a punt that had no, or a kickoff. There was no turnovers from JT Barrett, no fumbles. Basically, it was just a routine change of possession. And the opponent marched down the field and scored just 1 time last year. So, Tom, I know that he's just one guy and he's only up on the field a portion of the time. But 1 real legitimate touchdown drive says a lot to me. And I think it goes towards what Bill Davis was saying about he gets everybody in the right spot, knows what he's doing, knows what the defense is supposed to be doing. Does maybe he mean more than we even thought?
I saw that article, and that was a really interesting stat. And I looked at it, and I thought, that can't possibly be right. And I started going back and looking. I was like, yeah, that's actually right. It just, those numbers just seem crazy. I think there's probably a little bit of a correlation and causation thing there, where, like you said, he wasn't on the field against Oklahoma when Oklahoma kind of carved him up a little bit. And, some of the playing against teams that are kind of run heavy, those are teams that Ohio State can use that defensive line to kind of control the game, limit the run game. So there is a little bit of a, correlation and causation thing where, Lisa's rock keeps the Bears away, right. Which, yes, sort of. And, you know what? I would like to buy her rock, but that's not important right now. I think there is something to Borland and getting people in the right spots and getting people lined up correctly and making sure they've got the right call. Ohio State is so physically talented on defense that if you have people in the right spot, they're going to be fast enough and strong enough to make the play more often than not. So if you're just in the right spot, these guys are physically talented enough, well coached enough, solid technique enough that if they're in the right spot, they're going to make the play. So often last year we saw, like the Iowa game, for example, it was like linebackers overrunning plays and being in the wrong spot. It wasn't that they were just getting like manhandled or outrun. They were just not mentally in the right spot when they needed to be. So I think there maybe is something to that with Borland.
And I get the whole causation correlation thing because I agree with that. But then I look at the 1 touchdown drive. That's what, to me, says there's something there. And it's not necessarily, he wasn't starting against Penn State or Iowa. Look what happened. Whatever. That's a lot of that. That's also on JT Barrett. But the fact that he basically gets everybody where they need to be, which is an issue that we saw against Iowa for sure, against Oklahoma for sure. And that's a redshirt freshman doing that last year, which I think that's a good sign for what's to come, even though he's not going to be out there until who knows when. And that leaves us back to Justin Hilliard and Baron Browning, who have taken over for him, splitting 50-50. And we talked a couple weeks ago, maybe last week, about how with Tuff and Browning both being sophomore eligibility, somebody's going to have to move. And before that Borland injury, they had moved, I don't know how much, but they moved Browning to Will a little bit to give him a look there. So I'm thinking, does that mean they want Browning to start? They just know that Borland is the guy, and so they want maybe to give Browning a chance to win another job. I don't know, Shannon, do you think they want Browning in there, and that's maybe why they were looking to move him, and now they've moved him back to the mic and to see if he can take the spot from Justin Hilliard?
Yeah, I think we discussed that when we did the linebackers show, and I forget who said what in that show, but I remember I was saying that Tuff was probably, he's going to be the starter, and Borland be on the outside, and either Pete was going to be one of the other, on the other side, or I don't know if we were talking about Hilliard or not, but they definitely want to try to get both those guys on the field if possible.
Yeah, Tom, do you think maybe the move to Will for however long it was, but to me it seems like they would like Baron Browning to be a starting linebacker somewhere.
I certainly took that as he is one of our three best, and we're going to find a spot to get him on the field, because they don't try and have guys locked into I'm just a Will, I'm just a Sam, I'm just a Mike. They want to be able to get the three best linebackers on the field at the same time. And if they're moving you around and they're moving you away from a position where they feel like they have, basically the most locked in starter of those three, sounds like it was going to be Tuff Borland before he got hurt. So if they're moving you away from the position where they feel like they have a locked in starter, that tells me that they certainly feel like you have at least a pretty good chance of being one of those top three, and them wanting to find a way to get you on the field.
And this year, just like last year, they had their top three, but they also had packages where Malik Harrison would come in on passing downs. And Bill Davis said again last week that he foresees more of that. And I think there may be more than just a starting three, and then Malik Harrison, I expect him to be one of the starting three, so it'll be interesting to see what those packages look like. And I know, I think we've mentioned here before, the way that Bill Belichick uses players, he'll sign a player to do one specific thing, and they'll put them in packages to do, because this guy excels at coming around the right tackle and getting the quarterback, so that's what we want him to do, or this guy does that. I'm wondering if, because this is a staff that is close to Bill Belichick, and, they pick each other's brains. So I'm wondering if maybe some of that linebacker stuff is to put guys with specific skill sets. And these are guys who are very talented, very athletic, to get them to do just, certain things. And, this package is our nickel package. This package is this and this and this. But in this package, we like Keandre Jones here because he excels at this. And in this package, we like Pete Werner here because he does this better than anybody else. And there's just a lot of guys to work with to where you can find their best attributes and put that to use. Now, I think that's a lot to ask for maybe the college staff to get these players prepared for that, because you're teaching them the grand scheme of things, and then also you're teaching them some certain things. But Tom, isn't maybe that's something that Greg Schiano can do as he's got spare time going up and down the practice field? Do you think there's a chance that we see some of that like hyper specificity?
I think there's a definite chance. Schiano and Belichick have a history. Urban and Belichick have kind of a history. So, it would make sense that they have probably had that conversation with him at some point. And if you have the depth of players, the depth of talented players to be able to do that and be able to substitute kind of situationally and take advantage of guys' individual skill sets, then it seems like that would make a lot of sense. And to your point, always the challenge as a college team as opposed to a pro team is having the time to install, because you are so limited on the amount of time coaches can spend with players. But if you have Schiano being, he called himself a floater, floating from different areas, area to area in practice, looking at linebackers, looking at safeties, looking at defensive line, because he doesn't have a specific positional responsibility this year. Maybe you can take advantage of that. Maybe that does free you up to spend some extra time and coach, individual linebackers while Bill Davis is maybe working with, the rest of the unit. So, yeah, I mean, that if they have the coaching ability and the man hours to implement that kind of thing, I think that could be a very, very powerful tool for them to utilize this fall.
Yeah, and I think it's something that can go up and down the defense, not just with the linebackers, but with any of the defensive positions, just because, I mean, you got to justify your existence. So you need to bring what you've got. They like Urban likes to say, they're a bunch of 50-year-old guys drawing up plays on napkins. So now they've got more guys to not just come up with those plays, but sort of implement them and those different tasks. And we obviously don't know enough about the goings on of the defense to recognize any of these tweaks, but I think there's certainly some talks about getting guys into different positions to take advantage of their skills. So yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing just the different combinations, because there's a bunch of different linebackers who should they'd all be starting at other places. And there's only going to be 3 starters here, but I expect, we could see 5 or 6, 5 maybe regularly out there. With that in mind, I want us to, I don't remember what we each picked as far as a starting linebacker trio back when we did our linebacker show. So I wanted to venture a guess as to who we think will be the starting trio for the Oregon State game. For me, I'm going with, I think Justin Hilliard's going to win the job at middle linebacker unless Baron Browning is far superior. Like, if they're even, give it to Hilliard, because that's going to be tough Borland's job later on, most likely. So then can Browning take the job at the will over Keandre Jones, who we're not really hearing much about, but we're not hearing anything about the will. Like, there's, like we've said before, there's no concern. So for me, I'm going to go with Browning at the will, Justin Hilliard at the middle linebacker, and Malik Harrison at the Sam. I think that's his position to lose. Shannon, what do you got?
I think I might have to agree with those 3, except for I'm going to switch Barron and Hilliard.
Okay. Tom?
Yeah, that's exactly what I had. I had the same thing you had, Gert. And, I think maybe if there's a change there, if Borland has a setback, then maybe you move Browning to the mic and you have Keandre Jones playing the will. But, I think if they are sort of on schedule with Borland coming back, mid-September or end of September or thereabouts, which is sort of what, the basic timetable that they have right now, I think that you're probably exactly right. You put Browning at the will, let him get comfortable at that spot, don't move him mid-season, because you've got TCU in mid-September, and then you've got Penn State on the road at the end of September. So you don't have the luxury of, you don't want him going to camp in one position and then having to switch positions in the middle of the season when Borland comes back. I think that's probably not going to be the way they want to handle that. So yeah, I would go with you, Hilliard at Mike, and Browning at Will, and Harrison at Sam. Yeah,
because if Browning and Harrison are 2 of your best 3, then whoever you want on the field most, I guess, when Tough comes back, you get them used to the will is the word. Is how I see it. We also talked to the cornerbacks last week. Now, when I say we talked to the cornerbacks, we did not talk to Kendall Sheffield, whom we still have not talked to as a Buckeye football player. We did not talk to Damon Arnett. We talked to Jeff Okudah, Marcus Williamson, and Taver Johnson. One of the things that Taver said about Kendall Sheffield is that he has, people always ask, how's this guy looking? Where's he improved? What's he doing this spring? And the thing that Johnson said about Kendall Sheffield is that he's improved his eye discipline. He's got his eyes in the right spot. Now, I will tell you that probably doesn't mean the eyes are looking back for the football. Again, don't punch your computer screen or your phone, or, don't stab your ears in anger at the fact that they're not looking back for the ball right now. But one of the things that I took away from talking about Kendall Sheffield and what Kendall Sheffield has done in this offseason is, Tom, the fact that they let him run track tells you that they are completely comfortable with where he is as a football player. Don't you agree?
I think so. I mean, that is every minute you're running track and training for track is a minute you're not at the football facility, watching film or working with Coach Mick or whatever it is. So yeah, I think that was a huge signal that they are very comfortable with where he is, both as a player and a person, in terms of, managing his time and responsibilities and all that kind of stuff. So, I mean, I said last week or 2 weeks ago at some point that I anticipated one of the corners, either Arnett or Sheffield, would probably be taking a significant step forward this year and be that next first rounder. And, based on the little, the little bits that we've heard about those guys this spring, I think I'm going to push my chips in on Sheffield being the guy who's a first rounder next year.
Yeah, I don't think anybody would argue that right now, because then we contrast that with Damon Arnett, who is no longer in the number 3 jersey. He's wearing 46, which I assume we've talked about that here before, where that's not a cornerback number. That's a terrible number for any defensive back. And so, our speculation has been that he's not wearing that number voluntarily. And when Taylor Johnson was asked about that last week, he said that, talk to Urban Meyer about it. And so that sort of gives you an idea. And then Taylor was asked, how is Damon doing this spring? And it's very just a question like, tell us where he's good, just tell us he's doing well. That's so we can, write that in a story, basically. And instead of talking about how well he's playing, his answer was, well, he's got experience. He's got game experience, which to me sounds like, you got a friend who's setting you up and, hey, I've got this girl, you need to meet her. Well, what's she like? Well, she's got a good personality. That's sort of the way I took that. And that's reading between lines, maybe very incorrectly. But all these coaches do during the spring is talk about, well, this is how he's playing. He's, even if they're not playing well, they're like, well, this is what he's doing well. This is what he needs to work on. But with Damon Arnett, it's like, well, he's got game experience. So, that's the one thing he's got, that going for him is he's got game experience. And that's sort of a non-answer answer. Shannon, what do you think of that answer rather than, just telling us how he's playing?
Yeah, I think he might be, we've talked about before when Kerry Combs was saying that he liked the way he talked and all that kind of stuff. And we mentioned before how it's probably kind of annoying and you have to produce on the field, and maybe Johnson's not a big fan of it, and he's wanting him to actually learn how to play the position instead of just talking about it.
And I think none of us are grading the players. I think Damon Arnett gets an unfair rap just because somebody in the secondary has to take the fall for everything, and their every move is, it's over-examined, or, you get beat by one guy and then the next guy. And it's just, it builds and it snowballs, and every bad play is remembered, and it just gets tacked on to the last bad play. And, we go back to Donnie Nicky in 2002, 2001, could do nothing right. The guy ended up playing in the NFL for 6 or 7 years. But there's always, one scapegoat. And I'm not saying Damon Arnett was awesome last year. I don't know. I mean, there were times he was very good. Other times he got beat. But, I'm not coaching him. He was good enough to be part of a 3-man rotation. And Kerry Combs has said numerous times, if, one guy isn't as good as the other, he's not going to play him. So the fact that he's playing, I give the coaches the benefit of the doubt that he's good enough to play. But I think the other thing is, Taver, Shannon, you talked about Damon Arnett likes to talk. One of the things that Taver said is they've got to calm him down about that and sort of just calm him down about more than that, I think, as well. Just maybe, I don't know if he gets too amped up with himself, with the receivers. I don't know, and maybe that affects his play. But we'll watch him on Saturday and see how he does and see what we can take from that. What I thought was also interesting, Tom, is that Taver Johnson said that he thinks they have enough for a three-man rotation, or he just said a rotation, or maybe he said a three-man rotation. But he hasn't seen Jeff Okudah yet. So does he say there's enough for a rotation based on what he thinks or what he's been told Okudah is and what he sees in the meeting rooms from Okudah? Or is this because of what he's seen from Shaun Wade and Marcus Williamson, do you think?
By the end of last year, Okudah had pretty well established himself as a rotation guy, I think. And he saw real serious minutes in the Cotton Bowl and didn't look completely lost there against some pretty good skill talent from USC. My interpretation of that was he's talking about Okudah, and Okudah, has sort of proven himself enough last year that he is, basically penciled into the rotation already. That said, that does not preclude Wade or Williamson from also being in that rotation. I mean, everything that I've read and heard guys say about Wade this spring has been pretty positive. And, this is the second year for those guys. That's typically when you see people kind of take a leap from, completely lost as freshmen to playable, at least as sophomores. Okudah was better than that last year. Okudah was playable in the middle of his freshman year. But I think those other guys, it's entirely possible that they're looking at more than just a three-man rotation, that you've got Sheffield and Arnett and Okudah, and then maybe either Wade or Williamson, or potentially both at some point this year.
And they've been looking at Marcus Williamson in the nickel quite a bit as well. So maybe that's where he gets involved, and they can go ahead and just keep this rotation outside, and maybe Marcus Williamson. I mean, if he's good enough right now to be able to keep the corners outside, and he just, he's a nickel, that would say a lot for what they're seeing from him. Taver did call him probably the quickest of the corners, and he's the smallest, so I guess he should be the quickest. Jeff Okudah said that he would be ready to go by the end of this month or by the end of May with his shoulder, so he'll be all set. He'll have a good summer. And Tom, I'm with you, because we entered the spring basically with the assumption that he is the third guy. And whenever the corners are talked about, the rotation, it's the assumption that Okudah is that guy, and it's inferred, or nobody is really sort of correcting us in that thought process. So yeah, I'm with you. I really like just this entire group of corners, and we don't even talk about Tyreek Johnson and Sevyn Banks. But next year we probably will be talking about them quite a bit. Tom, anything else from the linebackers or corners that you wanted to touch on?
No, not really. I think we've pretty much covered it. I was going to mention Banks and Tyreek Johnson, but you just covered them, so I think we're all set.
You're welcome. So then on Monday, we talked to the running backs, Mike Weber, J.K. Dobbins, and Antonio Williams, and we talked to running backs coach Tony Alford. And basically, at this point, Antonio Williams is sort of the talk of spring when it comes to the running backs. He entered Ohio State at 227. Right now, he's down to 210. And he was asked, why did you drop the weight? And his answer was, you can't run away from anybody when you're 227. And he did say it was tough to drop the weight because he loves honey buns. As a guy who I prefer cinnamon rolls. I don't know. Shannon, where do you stand on honey buns?
I'm not a fan of honey buns, but I'm also not a fan of cinnamon buns either.
Wow. Tom, you? Honey buns?
They're not my favorite, but they'll do. I can respect the hustle.
I back in high school, one of the guys that I would eat with at our table, he had honey buns all the time. It was a staple, basically, and it might have been the only thing he would eat. But he would also talk with it while he's chewing on it, and it would get, it's all over his face. So I'm not a big honey bun guy. I've had that before, but it just brings back memories that, I don't need. I think for me, Antonio Williams is interesting because he's a guy who's behind two 1,000-yard rushers. He might be the most upbeat guy on the entire team. He's always great to talk to. And Tony Alford said last year that if you want to play, get better. And Tom, that's basically what Williams has done over the offseason this spring, and everybody is raving about him right now.
Yeah, I heard from I was talking to J.K. Dobbins, and J.K. Dobbins was trying very hard to not say anything about anything. But when people asked him about Weber and he playing together and what the two of them brought, he said essentially, two really, really elite running backs. And he said, and don't forget about Antonio Williams. He's right there with us. So, that was pretty unsolicited that he brought Williams up. And so I took that as kind of a telling sign. And then when I went back and read some of the other interviews, it seems like that was a pretty consistent thing. So when everyone on the team is talking about one guy, I think you can start putting some stock in it. Because we've talked in the past about, you always kind of wonder when it's like just like one person says, "Oh yeah, this guy looks really good." Like, are they just friends, or do they just see what they want to see? But there are certain guys this spring, guys like Davon Hamilton, now Antonio Williams, who there has been very consistent praise across players, across coaching staff, that I think is pretty indicative that there is, there really is something there that has changed.
And Alfred was asked how much Williams has closed the gap between him and Weber and Dobbins, and he said a lot. And then, he was also, well, how do you get Williams reps in a game? How do you get him carries? And Tony Alford said, I don't know yet. Basically, there's two guys that you have to get the ball in Weber and Dobbins. And then there's a third who you want to get the ball, and they're all good, but there's only so many carries, which leads us into Mike Weber, who his personal goal this year is 1,300 yards. I guess it's if he's hitting home runs like he did at the end of last season, it's a possibility. I think there's a really good chance that both Weber and Dobbins rush for 1,000 yards this season. I think 1,300 by anybody might be tough. Yes, I think Tough Borland is going to rush for 1,300 yards. But with
the Brandon Schnicker of 2018.
But you've got those 800 yards from JT are going to go somewhere. So I think it's possible. But Shannon, let me ask you, how realistic do you think it is for 1,300 yards for Mike Weber this year?
I definitely think it's a possibility. I mean, it depends on obviously how many carries he's going to get, but with his skill, and you're going to have possibly him and Dobbins in the backfield together, if Dobbins be blocking for him and stuff like that, I definitely think that there's a really, really great chance that actually both of those guys can eclipse 1,000 yards each.
Tom, how realistic do you think 1,300 is for Weber?
I think that you can figure the two of them together are going to put up about 2,000 yards, maybe a little more than that. But 1,300 probably involves someone getting hurt. Either Mike Weber turns into a real home run back and starts ripping off 60, 70-yard runs where you can rack up some real serious yardage on, 15 carries or so, 12 carries a game. Either he turns into a real home run threat this year, or someone gets hurt. I think those are the two ways he gets to 1,300. Because I'm right with you. I think both of them hitting 1,000 yards is entirely realistic this year. But between the two of them splitting carries, obviously Antonio Williams is in the picture, even if he's taken 5-6 carries away total, that's that's 20 yards a game potentially from Weber and Dobbins. So I think that 1,300 yards, if both of them are healthy all year, is probably going to be very tough for him to do. But both of them hitting 1,000, which would be a pretty remarkable achievement, that I think is pretty. I think that is a goal that's within reach for them.
Yeah, especially when we remind ourselves about Antonio Williams and the carries that he might take away from them. There's Demario McCall, Paris Campbell, the carries that they might take away from them. The 7 to 28 carries a game for Tate Martell. Tom, how realistic is it? Do you think they could have 3 1,000-yard rushers with Tate Martell obviously being, a third?
I think that they'll probably be capped at 2. I don't want to predict who those 2 would be, just to protect my personal brand here, but I think you're probably going to be capped at 2. But the 2 might not be the Heisman Trophy winner.
Right. 2 of those 3, I think, yeah. But, who's to say which 2 they would be? Speaking of 2, and speaking of Weber, Tom, did Mike Weber maybe let the cat out of the bag that the quarterback race is down to 2 guys now?
It certainly seemed like that, because I was right there. Actually, Caroline Rice and I were both there talking to him, and someone asked how the quarterback battle was going, and he said both the guys are playing, look great right now, really, really doing a fantastic job. And he said both again later, and then after the interview stopped, right as everyone was kind of breaking up, Laurie Schmidt said, "I just want to clarify, when you say both, who do you mean?" And he said, Joe Burrow and Dwayne Haskins. So that certainly sounds like Tate Martell is not really in the running for that starting quarterback job anymore, which we basically had this conversation last week. It probably almost has to be a 2-man battle in order to give Burrow a chance to stick around, because if it's a 3-man battle, then, you're not going to have any kind of resolution. I think as soon as they started talking about a Martell package, I think that was kind of the tip-off that he was probably not going to be your starter, because he's going to play. He's going to play meaningful snaps this year, but I think we have pretty much gotten it confirmed as much as we're going to get it confirmed at this point that he's not going to be the guy who's starting this fall.
Right, and by giving him all of these reps, it gets him ready to be a guy who they are going to count on, who they want to be a playmaker. It's just right now they don't really expect him to be the starter. But you know what? You give him a shot to get him ready to contribute, and if he ends up showing he's the best, then then he's the best. But I think Mike Weber probably echoes everybody else on the team that it's a 2-man race, and when Tate's out there, he's effective and he's good, but he's there are 2 guys who are vying for the starting position. Now, which takes us to, it doesn't take us anywhere, but we haven't talked about J.K. Dobbins yet. I thought it was interesting. Last year he played at 208. This year he's up to 215. He might now be the heaviest running back, because Mike Weber is always around 212, 215. And so I don't know if anybody asked him, or I don't remember seeing it in the transcript. I didn't ask him what he weighs now. So it would be pretty interesting if JK is both the shortest and the heaviest and the fastest. But I don't. When we talk about JK's home run ability, I always get the question about, can he get faster, because he was getting caught from behind last year, and then I think we've mentioned it here before. He's not getting caught from behind because he's slow. He just runs out of gas. And so that's one of the things that he's worked on this offseason, is to better fuel economy, I guess. And we'll see. Mike Weber, we can go back to Carlos Hyde. The year, I think it was 2012, when he rushed for about 970 yards with Braxton Miller, and Hyde had some carries that should have gone the distance but didn't. And he said during the offseason he wanted to hit more home runs. And then fast forward to 2013, and he did that. And for a while, it seemed like almost like when Beanie Wells in 2007 sort of averaged like one a game, it seemed, and Hyde was right there doing that as well. And then we saw Mike Weber, sort of the same thing in 2016, getting the shoestring tackles and going into the offseason with the idea that he wanted to hit more home runs. And when he was finally healthy, we saw him do that and not get caught from behind. The Michigan State game is one of those games. And so that's what J.K. Dobbins, he's sort of, that's his focus. No, not, it's one of his foci, I don't know. But this is a staff that has dealt with that, strength staff who has dealt with that, and they've gotten results. So I would expect the results to continue with Dobbins. I think perhaps the most entertaining aspect or event from the running back interviews was Tony Alford being asked how he keeps the running backs happy, and basically laughed the reporter who asked the question out of the building almost, saying, his job is not to keep running backs happy. And which, if you go to Ohio State, I guess you have to expect it to be the man. That's one of the things that Alfred said. He's like, he wants all alpha males in the room who wants guys who want the running game on their backs. But we see every year that that's not always that easy. Right now, Weber and Dobbins, he said, are getting equal carries. And one of the annoying things for me was Taylor Johnson mentioned the quarterbacks. And so a couple minutes later, I asked him if anybody had stepped forward yet. And his answer to me was, you should ask the quarterbacks coach. Which, that's what I sort of expected, but I had to ask because we haven't talked to anybody since the week before. And Friday there was a scrimmage, and maybe I thought I could get an answer. But then, a couple minutes later, Tim May asks, have any of the young offensive linemen stepped forward and stood out to him? And so then they start having this conversation about Thayer Munford. And I'm thinking, well, that's bullcrap. Tell Tim May to ask the offensive line coach. But he did.
Your problem is you're not folksy enough, Gerd. You didn't give it like a good little Texas twang. If you do that, I think that's how you get the answer out of him.
I've been around Tim for a long time. I'm still learning. I admit it. Tom, anything else from the running backs? There's some mention of Master Teague, but it's the typical freshman stuff. Taylor Johnson or Tony Alford gave the drinking through a fire hose analogy. Anything else that stood out for you?
Yeah, I had Teague down as just something we could talk about for a minute if we wanted to. I mean, Dobbins, this was another thing that Dobbins actually talked about for a little bit was, just Teague dealing with the speed and learning the plays and, learning the offense and how Dobbins is working with him, trying to talk over plays, concepts with him, all that kind of stuff. Running back is typically a position where you, as a true freshman, can get on the field and make an immediate impact. I mean, you go back to Robert Smith, Maurice Clarett, J.K. Dobbins, like that's a place where you can get on the field and make an immediate impact, much more so than wide receiver. And I would, frankly, based on the little bits that we've seen out of Teague this spring, think that in a normal year, yeah, you might peg him for someone who could go for 250, 300 yards as a true freshman. But this year, behind Weber, behind Dobbins, behind Williams, he probably physically could do it this year, but I just don't know that he's going to get the snaps. I will be interested to see. I doubt they redshirt him because I think he'll contribute on special teams and he'll probably play just enough on offense that they decide not to redshirt him this year. But I'll be interested to see where he ends up in terms of total yardage this year because it's just I just don't know where the carries are going to come from for him.
Yeah, I thought one of the interesting things about that, and I wrote about it in a notebook on Tuesday, that Tony Alford said that he's got 3 veteran running backs, and they can have these real involved and in-depth conversations in their meeting room not just about what to do, but why they do it. And the running backs ask questions. And this is the room that Master Teague is learning in. So he's getting to learn from, as Tony Alford said, it's a graduate level course in being an Ohio State running back. And so this is going to be a very interesting, very informative time for Master Teague. It's sort of like when you're learning Spanish and you go spend 2 months in Spain and you're just there and you pick up on everything quicker and you learn the language. So that's sort of what he's going through right now. And yeah, I don't know where he's going to get carries, but they always find a way for a freshman to get 30 or 40 carries and give him a bunch of carries in a blowout like Ezekiel Elliott had in 2013, like DeMario McCall had in 2015, like Curtis Samuel had a 100-yard day as a running back in 2014 in his freshman year. So there will be times when they don't maybe want any of their three, including Antonio Williams, to be the guy to just pound himself up in there. But he looks good, but we haven't seen anybody in, I don't know, Tom, 2 weeks. Is that about right?
Yeah, we haven't seen a meaningful as spring practice snaps get in the limited window that we have. We haven't even seen that in a week and a half. So yeah, the spring game is going to be really interesting because there are certain position groups we basically haven't seen at all because they're practicing on the far end of the field and we're kind of penned in on one end of the field at the 30-yard line. So I feel like we've seen a ton of the defensive linemen and not very much, for example, of the offensive line because they're generally way down the other end of the field. So, there are a lot of guys, including Teague, who I'm very interested to see in that spring game on Saturday.
Yeah, we haven't seen a single running play. I mean, really nothing from scrimmage as far as 11 on 11. So this will be our first chance. Anything else? No, I think we covered everything with the running backs. Now, we mentioned a couple last week or so that we were going to start watching the Michigan Amazon Prime show entitled All or Nothing. And so, yeah, we all watched that. And this will be our time to review it, make fun of it, talk about it, make fun of it. For me, we're just watched the first episode. There's 8 episodes. The first episode, it covers spring, fall camp, the spring and then the trip to Rome, fall camp, and like the first game against Florida, maybe in its entirety.
The first
half of it.
Just the first half of that Florida game.
I was pretty bored by it. It was more like a whole bunch of nothing instead of all or nothing, but you've got to lay the groundwork. Tom, what'd you think of it?
Yeah, it was. I'm with you. It was a little slow. I have done a little bit of TV and documentary stuff in my other work in the past, so I probably watch it a little differently than other people do. But it was just some of the production choices were a little weird. I came away thinking, they didn't do as much as I expected with the access that they had.
Right. I
mean, they are right there in practice, in meetings. They have access to the headset going back and forth from the booth to the sideline. Like, I mean, they've got everything. And it was a little underwhelming. And we've only watched the first episode, so I'm kind of reserving judgment on the series on the whole. I mean, it's entirely possible that episode 1 was just kind of, okay, we're trying to establish characters. Look, we're really focusing on Rashawn Gary because we want you to learn to care about Rashawn Gary, not just as a player, but as a person. And establishing some of those people as characters, establishing Don Brown, and here's who Don Brown is, and look at Don Brown, he's fighting someone with a sword, and he's fiery, and Jim Harbaugh, he's so wacky, look, he's making rocket noises, and it could be a lot of that where you're just trying to sort of set stuff up where, a lot of times the first or second episode of a TV series season is kind of slow as they're kind of trying to set up the rest of the series. The other question is, did the interesting stuff get trimmed way back because of, I'm making air quotes here, helpful production notes from someone somewhere, where either, they didn't want to go too deep and try and make it more broadly interesting and make it more of a little bit of a human interest story and not as football centric, and it's more about the people. That would be my guess, is that someone at Netflix decided that they didn't want it to be too football-y, so it's more focused on the people and, telling the stories of the people, which, yeah, that's a very common storytelling decision, and I'm sure that Netflix wants it to be as broadly popular as possible. But if you're watching it for football, that's going to make it much less interesting. There wasn't a ton of interesting football stuff.
Right, and if you compare it to Hard Knocks on Showtime or HBO, wherever it is now, I enjoy the inside access to the football goings on, talking about personnel. The few times when, maybe 6 seconds, when like Pep Hamilton, the offensive coordinator, and Tim Drevno, the other offensive coordinator at the time, and Jim Harbaugh are talking about who is leading at quarterback between Wilton Spate and John O'Korn. Like I said, that maybe was 6 seconds where Jim Harbaugh's like, well, I think it's Wilton right now, and the other two guys, I don't know if they said anything. They're just like, yeah, okay. Shannon,
go ahead. I think Drevno was kind of advocating for O'Korn at one point, I think, and it was just knowing with retrospect how the O'Korn thing turned out and how the Drevno thing turned out. That was a little darkly funny, like watching the Hindenburg get ready to take off. Tim Drevno advocating for John O'Korn, like, oh yeah, this is going to end well. Good luck.
Yeah,
have fun storming the castle.
And Shannon, who loved the show so much that he watched the entire thing because he couldn't stop, and has strong feelings for Michigan. Do they end up showing more like behind the scenes personnel stuff, coaches talking to coaches, or do they continue to make a whole bunch of human interest stuff out of it?
It's pretty much the press box type deal where, talking between the coaches. They don't, get into a lot of the, coaches meetings and stuff like that. One of the things, did you know that Michigan was one of the youngest teams in the country last year?
I mean, the first episode let us know that 3 or 4 times, if I recall.
I mean, I know that there was an Ohio State team the year before that was one of the youngest in the nation, and I believe they went to the playoffs. Sure, they got shut out, and you went and hired the coach that was responsible for the shutout for your offensive line. But do you think that just based off the first episode right now and seeing that Pep Hamilton is calling the passing plays and Drevno was doing the running plays, that Drevno is pretty much let out to hang and he's like at fault for the offensive passing game?
Well, he was also the offensive line coach.
Sure. But if you don't have any talent there.
I don't, Michigan fans didn't really care for either of the offensive coordinators. And I don't think either of them certainly didn't earn their money. I think they're both, I don't know if Drevno was the guy who got the brunt of it, but I know they're in a better place now with Ed Warner instead of him. One of the interesting, kooky, odd things for me was Jim Harbaugh addressing his team. I don't know, maybe for the first time in spring or fall with everybody there. And he told the story of his childhood of going to an ice cream parlor, but he didn't have any money. And so, I don't know if it was the ice cream guy was like, you know what, I'll give you some. And he wouldn't take a handout, and he got mad about it. And it stuck with him to this day. I don't know what the lesson was. It was just about creating this anger inside of you and playing with it, like putting it on the field. And it was just really bizarre because, I think back to when I was like 4, we had the ice cream man come around, me and my cousin Shane. We didn't have any money, but we still wanted ice cream. So we stopped the ice cream truck, and then we had toy pistols, and we basically like held the ice cream man up, demanding ice cream. Now, he didn't give us any ice cream, but he gave us some candy, which is good enough. But I haven't, put that into my soul to this day. And anytime I want something, I don't go and, I'll cut to the line of Chipotle with a plastic gun because, it worked when I was 5, or I remember this whole lesson that I learned, plastic guns will get me stuff. Like he's to be able to draw back on this time when, I don't know, he was 7, 8 years old and like use it. I mean, it's Tom, it comes from a strange place.
Every place with Jim Harbaugh is a strange place. There is nothing that is like a normal human being thing about that guy. He's like socially awkward. Like there was an interaction with him and like a freshman wide receiver in his old dorm room that was like.
You have to introduce yourself to your freshman wide receiver.
They're building robots and trying to train robots to jump and perform human tasks. It's like, oh, look, this is a robot trying to have a human conversation. This is what people do. People do this. He's a weird dude. He does there was this scene right in one of the meetings right at the start of the season. He's trying to explain that their season's going to be like a plane or it's going to be like a rocket ship. And then he starts making the rocket noises. It's like, what are you doing? Like, and you look at the faces of the players in the crowd looking at him like, what is wrong with this guy? He's an odd dude, and he's not as intense as I sort of expected he would be behind the scenes. He's not as intense as he sort of portrays himself. At least they don't show him that way.
Yeah.
My favorite part of the whole thing, of the first episode, was the narrator at the beginning when they're doing the,
Mark Harmon.
Michigan Stadium, the largest stadium in all of American sport, home to the winningest program in the history of college football. And I wrote this line down. It was my favorite. When Michigan fell on hard times, they called on Jim Harbaugh. And then he said no, and they hired Brady Hoke. And then they kept falling on hard times, and then he finally was like tired of getting, tired of the NFL, and then he came back. But they didn't. They skipped the middle part where he was, bad mouthing the general studies degrees at Michigan and all that.
I'm glad I wasn't the only person who wrote that line down.
Yeah, the show's narrated by Mark Harmon, who plays Leroy Jethro Gibbs on NCIS. I guess his dad is a former player of Michigan.
His dad is Tom Harmon, who is a legend. I think he probably won the Heisman there, but his numbers retired at Michigan. And his dad, he's a big noted Michigan fan. I don't know if Mark Harmon went there too, but Tom Harmon is one of the legendary figures of the era when Michigan actually won national championships.
I believe Mark Harmon is a former UCLA quarterback, actually.
Yes.
The other thing that I kind of chuckled at was John O'Corn FaceTiming with a buddy on the phone, and his friend just seemed so disinterested. It was just like, And John O'Corn is talking about, I just got to be myself. Last time I was pressing, I was trying to, do everything I could for this offensive coordinator. And his buddy's just like, It's just like, it just looked like he wanted to get off the phone, but this is a guy who's in the NFL now, playing for, I think, the Houston Texans, and O'Corn is in his dorm room and spilling his guts, and just, his buddy with the Texans is trying to be a good friend. So props to that guy. The other thing when you're talking about Jim Harbaugh in the dorm room, I cannot picture in my mind Urban Meyer going to any player's dorm room. So props to Jim Harbaugh for that, sort of lowering himself and putting himself in a dorm. But of course it was the one he went to, and he had cameras following him. So, maybe take all of that with a little bit of grain of salt. Overall, I mean, I didn't have an episode right then, but it will get better because there are games coming, and I think that's when things get interesting. Or at least I hope so. Anything else that you guys, either of you, wanted to touch base on with that one?
Does their practice seem like real low key compared to Ohio State's?
I was going to ask that.
Like, it just, that struck me like it just, and you never know. You can shoot stuff in such a way that you don't really get the whole picture, but it just doesn't seem like the atmosphere is not the same. The intensity didn't look like it's the same. And, that just struck me as very odd for a place that fashions itself, tough man ball, big boy football. It seemed very like that's what I imagine UCLA football practice looks like. Like, yep, it's sunny. We're all wearing shorts. It's great. It's nice here. It'll be fine. It's nice. Like it was not what we are used to seeing at Ohio State.
No, and I guess you talked about man ball. Jim Harbaugh started one of his meetings with a poem that he wrote for the team. So
that's a type of man.
But yeah, like you said, he's not intense in practice like you would expect. But we didn't really get to see a lot, and some of that practice footage was in Rome, where he's thanking people for showing up, and I want to see in season stuff. I think that'll be more interesting.
Just as a spoiler,
yeah,
the intensity for the practices, it's the same.
Man,
that was something that I was watching. And I was like, this is just, it seems very odd to me that each practice seems to be low key and they just seem to be walking through and just doing whatever. It didn't seem right to me. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe they can't play music because Amazon doesn't hold rights to it. Who knows?
You could call that incidental. If it's playing in the background of where you are and you're just kind of picking it up as you're shooting, editing that together would be a pain in the butt. But you can if you're walking down the street, I'm sorry, I'm giving you way too much minutia about film production. But if you're like walking down the street and there's just music coming out of like a car next to you, you don't have to pay licensing on that. So I don't know. I have not done a behind the scenes football thing, but I would assume that if the music was there, it would not have to be licensed, but it would probably be a pain in the butt to try and cut that together and splice the different pieces of music together, like the different sections of a song, if you're cutting different shots together. You don't care about any of this. So never mind.
I'm basically, I'm John O'Corn's FaceTime partner right now. Uh-huh. Yeah, that's great, Tom.
Well, I got to go throw another interception into Damon Webb. See ya. Bye.
So that was the first episode. We will talk about episode 2 next week. We are planning to have a Michigan Monday podcast talking about Michigan's spring game, which
not a spring
isn't
game,
necessarily
it's
a game. There's some specifics about maybe some situational stuff, but we should see a bunch of the players. And Michigan's spring game is annually terrible, and annually the weather is poor. So I don't know, Tom. There may not be anything to talk about, honestly, but we'll give it a go.
That's never stopped us before.
That is true. There's something to talk about before we get out of here, and that's probably the biggest thing of the week so far in Ohio State sports, and that was the verbal commitment of 5-star forward Alonzo Gaffeny out of Cleveland to the Ohio State basketball team. 5-star guy, number 3 power forward in the nation, number 18 player in the nation, 6'9", 190, a skinny dude. But if you watch his highlights, he's a superb athlete. He gets up quick. He's got really long arms. And he's not just a post player. He's got 3-point range. He can shoot off the dribble. He can catch and shoot. He's got post moves. He's got a mid-range game. The only limitation you look at and you see is, he's just really skinny. Like I said, 6'9", 190, maybe 200 pounds. But looks like a really good player. Tom, did you check out any of his highlights?
Just a little bit, and I'm always a little leery of watching highlights and making judgments about what guys look like, because you've obviously got to decent jump in competition. And you're also not seeing the shots that he's missed. So everyone's shooting 1,000% from the floor in their highlight reels. But yeah, I mean, there is skill there. It seems like that has been missing from this program for a little while. Like they've had good players, but that's a profile that I don't think we've really seen. At least recently. I mean, I mean, it's a different type of player than D'Angelo Russell, but I mean, that's sort of the natural comp. I think just that level of player. I think you can probably almost write off this upcoming season as, maybe he'll pull another rabbit out of his hat and they'll turn nothing into something. But I think this is going to be kind of a transition year. But bringing him in now sets them up for 2019, 2020 to have a pretty special season. Even if he's only here for 1 year, you've got him, you've got another guy we're going to talk about in a minute who's going to become, eligible that season at point. And you have, Holtman having his third year and having brought in some guys, and some of the Mata classes that just completely didn't pan out will have kind of aged off the roster. So it won't matter. You'll have a full roster. Like that's the year I think you can kind of, if you're an Ohio State basketball fan, I think you can circle that 2019-2020 season as, this is when, keep Final Four weekend open that year just in case.
No pressure. I'm with you when, with highlights. What I like to look for is, does his shot look natural? Does it look fluid? And it does. And he puts the ball on the court. He looks comfortable doing all of that, and I think that's the big key. He's the biggest guy, the biggest commitment since D'Angelo Russell. But I think, Shannon, it might be even bigger because he's an Ohio kid, and sort of what Tom was alluding to, it sets you up moving forward, maybe brings some momentum. So can I argue, is it okay to argue that this is a bigger commitment than D'Angelo Russell because he's an in-state kid where Chris Holtman needs to continue to make inroads?
I think it is, just based on the simple fact that this is the number one player in the state, and Holtman in his second year now, we'll say it, or first year, whatever you want to call it, but he's bringing the number one recruit in the state to Columbus, which is, I mean, this kid's got offers from Michigan State, Kansas, I forget like all the other ones, but a lot of the top line schools and everything. And it's huge for Ohio State.
Yeah, I'll be interested to see if they can maybe make some movement with Jeremiah Francis, who's the number 2 player in the state. He's a point guard, currently committed to North Carolina, is the son of former Buckeye captain Jerry Francis. And we'll see if they can do anything there. What Tom mentioned earlier, the transfer of Florida State point guard C.J. Walker was a true sophomore this year. We'll have to sit out the 2018-19 season, and then we'll have 2 years of eligibility beginning in 2019-2020. So, yeah, you're looking at that season with Walker, with the 2 guards they're bringing in this year, Luther Muhammad and Dwayne Washington, Musa Jallow, Justin Ahrens, also on the swing position there, and with the front court players that they already have, Caleb Wesson as well. So it could be an interesting season and something to for all the Buckeye fans to look forward to. Now, I will say C.J. Walker, I mean, the numbers aren't great. About 8 points a game, 2.5 assists a game, but he was the starting point guard for Florida State, but he finished 4th in assists per game. And his numbers trailed off after about, with like 10 games to go. Like his minutes really diminished. So I don't know what happened in there, but it looks like him and the coach maybe fell out of favor with each other. And clearly he wanted to leave because he's gone, and he'll be at Ohio State here shortly and learn from Chris Holtman and his in 2018-19, and then be good to go the year after that. Yeah, I think that's going to do it for you. Go ahead, Shannon.
I was going to say, I was talking to Eric, who I do our basketball shows for the Silver Bullets podcast, And he said he was talking to one of his Florida State buddies about, him transferring over. And the guy was like, good riddance. And he was like, why? And he says, well, he's out of control. He's a real good 3-point shooter, but he goes in hard for layups, doesn't make them, falls down, leaves a fast break for other teams, wash, rinse, repeat. And I think by coming here, I think Holtman was trying to get him when he was at Butler, so they already had a connection, and him sitting for a year and learning Holtman's system and just learning how to be a good, point guard by not playing for a year, I think it's going to help him out a lot.
Yeah, and that's one thing that Holtman did with even C.J. Jackson. He got him under control, got him calmed down, because you can't play out of control if you're going to be the point guard. And, one thing we've seen at Florida State is that, Leonard Hamilton his teams can kind of get out of control a little bit. They're not the most disciplined. And so, you've got a year to get that out of CJ Walker. And I don't think it should be much of an issue, because they focused on that so much here with the Buckeyes. I think that'll go ahead and close this show up. We're going to have another show on Friday previewing the Ohio State spring game, which will be our first chance to actually see the Buckeyes this spring, pretty much. Your first chance too, so we'll all get to experience it together, and it will be awesome and spectacular, and I can't wait. So thank you, everybody, for listening. Make sure to check out the rest of the shows on the Ozone Radio Network, starting on Mondays with the Buckeye Sloopcast, sometimes Tuesdays with the Sons of Schmidt. We are on Wednesdays and Fridays for now. I don't know what's going to happen after spring ball. We'll talk. And then, of course, Silver Bullets podcast Thursday and sometimes on the weekends, depending on what's going on. So thank you all for listening, and we will see you on Friday.
We could steal a car and leave